Okay, listen, pay attention. You know, most often than not, when we talk about slave trade in Africa, a whole lot of Africans are resulted into thinking about the transatlantic slave trade. That is the slave trade that featured the Europe and Americans, the likes of the Portuguese, the British, the French, the Italians, the Germans, the Spaniards, and the Americans, the transatlantic slave trade. But listen, I want to tell you something today. There is a particular civilization that most often than not, we exempt them when we are talking about slave trade in Africa, and that is the Arab civilization. It may shock you to know that even before the Europeans and the Americans came to enslave the people of Africa, the Arabs were already here enslaving the people of Africa. The Arabs were here as early as 650 AD. They were here. The Europeans came in 1400, that is 15th century. These people were here in 650 AD. Their presence could be found in the eastern coast of Africa, and that is in Tanganyika, the one you call Tanzania, in Kenya, and in Malawi, in that hinterland. They were there enslaving African people. They were the first civilization to come into Africa and took Africans away from Africa as slaves. They were the first people to do it. We must laud it that the Arabs were the first, and that is the Arab Emirates, and that is the Omani Empire. They were the first people to took Africans out of Africa as slaves. Now listen, you may ask yourself, how come we have African Americans in America? We have Africans who can be found in Britain. We have Africans who can be found in Latin America. We have Africans who can be found in Caribbean America. But how come that most times we don't see Africans in the Arab world? Why? Is it because the Arabs did not carry so much as slaves? No, they did. Listen. While an estimated number of 10 to 12 million Africans were taken out of Africa through the transatlantic slave trade, do you know how many the Arabs took? The Arabs took an estimated number of 18 million Africans out of Africa. But the question is, how come we don't have Africa in Arabs? Arabs who are Africans. How come we don't have it? I will tell you why. Listen, the Arab slave trade that did something that is so inhuman, very cruel to humanity. Do you know what they did? The Arab slave trade that were in the business of capturing African slaves and castrating them. They castrated African slaves. They enslaved them and castrated them so that they will not procreate, so that they will not give birth. That was inhuman. They didn't want them to procreate and scatter all over their place. So when they capture an African slave, when they enslave an African and bring him to their place, they castrate the African so that the person will not procreate. The Europeans allowed the Africans that they captured as slaves to procreate, to breed. The more they give birth, the more slaves they have. But the Arabs did not want that. They castrated the Africans who they took as slaves so that they will not procreate. They treated them the way they treated animals, the way they treated cows and rabbits and goats. That is why today you cannot find an African Arab or Arab African in the Arab world because they castrated them. That is inhuman. So we don't say it as we are supposed to say it. We should laud it more often than not. We should talk about it because most times we blame the Europeans. Yes, they should be blamed. We blame the Americans. Yes, they should be blamed for that atrocity they committed. But we don't talk about the Arabs. We should talk about the Arabs. They did something very cruel to humanity. They enslaved our people in Africa. They castrated our men and stopped them from procreating. They took 18 million of us. We should talk about it. The Arab Emirates, the Omani Empire, they did it. They did it. They did it, and the facts are there. So we must talk about it. We must laud it. In as much as we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, we must talk about the Arab slave trade. But what now happened is that the Europeans, the transatlantic slave trade, the Europeans who came to enslave Africans and took them away from Africa to use them as commodities in their place, they did not mingle with Africans in Africa. They didn't marry them. But the Arab slave traders mingled with some Africans in Africa. They intermarried. In that process, they Islamized them. They Arabized them. Permit me to use the word Arabize. They They Islamized those parts of Africa, the eastern coast. They Islamized them. That is why today you think that that part of Africa, they are Islam by default. They were not Islams by default. No, they were not Islams by default. They were Islamized. Okay? They were Islamized. So we must laud it that the Arabs were the first civilization to come into Africa and enslave the people of Africans. Know it. They came in 650 AD. Know it. Know it. Know it for the knowing sake. Have it in your mind. So you will not think that they are sent. They are not sent. They committed atrocities. They did. They did. They did. Africa. Wisdom is a principal thing. Of course, you know you can always request for books from me. All you need to do is to go to my bio. You see a WhatsApp contact there. Request for book and book will be given to you. All right? Read. For reading is a mental calisthenics. I love you and I care about you. The essence is to make you read. In my next video, I am going to be giving you a shocking revelation about something that you need to know in Africa, especially in West Africa. I love you and I care about you. Remember, pray to God and read your Bible. Make sure you read your book. Wisdom Africa is the principal thing. Aha!